The judge looked at Natalie Bennett Fay. His reading glasses came off slowly, the way a man removes them when he wants the courtroom to see his eyes. The recording had just finished playing. 3 hours and 17 minutes of audio compressed into 12 minutes of selections that stripped every defense bare. 51 months federal prison, $287,000 in restitution, a medical license, not hers, but the one she'd been forging orders under, already surrendered 9 months before she signed his name to the last claim. And the woman who'd called me Dad to my face while billing Medicare for home health visits I never received, who told my son I was already halfway gone, stood at the defense table with her hands flat on the wood, perfectly still, as if standing still could undo 18 months of fraud. But that morning started 8 months earlier, with a Medicare Summary Notice mixed in with a water bill, the kind of document most people throw away unread. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harlan Moss. I'm 70 years old and I live in Roanoke, Virginia, in a fieldstone house in the old Southwest Historic District that I've owned outright for 22 years. I spent 34 years as the administrator of Mercy Valley Regional Medical Center, a 400-bed facility with a $180 million annual operating budget. I oversaw 7 Joint Commission accreditation cycles, not a single conditional finding. I personally investigated 11 internal billing fraud cases that resulted in terminations and criminal referrals to the Office of Inspector General. I served 9 years on the Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association's Compliance Advisory Board. I know Medicare billing codes and HCPCS modifiers the way most people know their phone number. When I retired 5 years ago, I thought the hardest compliance case of my career was behind me. I was wrong by a considerable margin. These days, I restore antique medical instruments. I have a workshop in my basement, 13 pieces mounted on felt-lined shadow boxes along the walls. A Civil War-era bone saw, a 1930s ophthalmoscope, a set of brass auscultation tubes from the 1880s. People ask me why I spend my retirement fixing things that nobody uses anymore. I tell them it's the same work I did for 34 years. You take something broken, figure out which part failed, and you fix the system around it. Right now, I'm rebuilding a 1920s balmanometer. That's a mercury sphygmomanometer, a blood pressure device with a corroded brass valve assembly, a cracked leather cuff, and a mercury column that hasn't read true in decades. The brass needs reseating. The leather needs replacing. The mercury column needs recalibrating. Patient work, precise work, the kind of work that teaches you that nothing gets fixed by rushing. My wife Doris died 7 years ago, early onset Alzheimer's. She was 61. I managed her care myself for the first 2 years, bathed her, fed her, read to her when she stopped recognizing my face. She died at Mercy Valley, in a room I had personally approved the renovation of in 2004. Every restored instrument in my workshop has a small brass tag on the back with her initials, D.E.M. I don't talk about her often, but she's in every piece I fix. Before all of this started, I was content, genuinely content. I had my house, my workshop, my Tuesday trips to the hardware store, and a view of the Blue Ridge from my back porch. I could see the medical center where I'd spent 34 years from my kitchen window. I had enough. And then I made the mistake of being generous to the wrong people. Craig was a sweet kid, my son. He was the kind of boy who ran to meet me every evening when I came home from the hospital, even when I came home at 9 o'clock, even when he was supposed to be in bed. He'd hear my car in the driveway and come padding down the stairs in his pajamas, and Doris would pretend to be annoyed. But she'd already made him a glass of milk because she knew he wouldn't go back to sleep until he'd told me about his day. He was an Eagle Scout, built a birdhouse for his project that still hangs from the oak tree in my backyard. When his mother died, he cried so hard at the funeral they had to help him to the car. I remember holding his arm and thinking, this boy still has a good heart. He just needs someone to help him find his way. Craig is 41 now. Pharmaceutical sales for a mid-tier specialty drug company. Makes $94,000 base, plus commission. That sounds comfortable until you learn he carries $67,000 in credit card debt and leases a BMW he can't afford. He didn't become a bad person. He became a hollow one. There's a crack in Craig, a desperate need to be chosen by someone, to be told he matters. And Natalie didn't create that crack. She poured herself into it until there was no room left for anyone else. I met Natalie Birch at a dinner Craig arranged at a restaurant downtown. She was 29 then, sharp cheekbones, careful makeup, a licensed clinical social worker with a voice that dropped to a near whisper when she wanted something. The first thing I noticed wasn't her smile. It was the way her eyes swept over the restaurant, quick, appraising, cataloging the price points. The second thing I noticed was how she looked at Craig. The way you look at a tool that does what you need it to do. She asked about my career. When I said hospital administrator, 34 years, something shifted behind her eyes. Not interest, calculation. And when I mentioned compliance, her smile tightened for just a fraction of a second before resetting. I've sat across from people in disciplinary hearings for 3 decades. I know what a reset looks like. I met Faye Birch, Natalie's mother, at the engagement dinner. Same calculating precision, wrapped in a warmer package. She asked about my retirement, and when I mentioned my pension, her pen appeared, writing on a napkin she said was for gift ideas. She drove a Cadillac Escalade she parked in my driveway, blocking my car in. Craig started changing before the wedding. Small things. He'd repeat Natalie's phrases: strategic investment, leveraging assets, equity position. Words that had never been part of his vocabulary. At family dinners, he'd look to Natalie before answering my questions, the way a student checks with the teacher before raising a hand. By the reception, my son was already becoming someone else's echo. The erosion started 6 months after the wedding. I'd call Craig on Saturday mornings. We used to talk every week. Natalie started answering his phone. "Craig's resting, Mr. Moss. He'll call you back." He rarely did. When I drove over unannounced one Sunday, she met me at the door with a concerned expression I'd watched her rehearse in the hallway mirror 30 seconds earlier. "Craig has a migraine. Maybe call first next time?" She said it the way a receptionist manages a walk-in appointment. Polite, firm, and final. The second incident was worse. I stopped by to drop off some paperwork and found Natalie in my study. Not Craig's study, my study, in my house, sitting at my desk with a manila folder open in front of her. She closed it when I walked in, but not before I saw the tab, Estate, H. Moss. She smiled. "I was just tidying up for you, Dad." 34 years of hospital administration taught me to recognize when someone is reading a chart they have no authorization to access. And none of this fit. None of it fit the woman Craig had described as just wanting to help. By September, Craig had asked about my will 3 times. Each time, I could hear someone coaching him from just below audible range. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being a hospital administrator who'd investigated 11 fraud cases. There's a difference. In Virginia, it's perfectly legal to record on your own property. Virginia Code Section 19.2-62. I purchased a voice-activated digital recorder and placed it inside the restored 1940s stethoscope case on my hallway shelf, a piece Natalie walked past every time she entered my house. I started keeping copies of every document in a fireproof safe in my workshop. I changed the combination twice. Now let me tell you what generosity cost me. Over 4 years, I sent Craig $3,400 a month. That's $163,200 total. I paid $44,000 for what Craig called a home renovation. It was actually the build-out for Natalie's home health agency office in my guest suite. I co-signed a $95,000 SBA loan for what Craig described as his side business importing supplements. There were no supplements. The loan funded Birch Elder Services, Natalie and Faye's company. I paid $7,400 a year in property taxes on my Fieldstone house, money I never complained about because it was my home and I took care of what was mine. Total direct support to my son and his wife, $309,600. They thought I was a modest retiree living on Social Security and a small pension. They never asked what my total retirement accounts held. $3.1 million across a 457B deferred compensation plan and an IRA rolled over from my hospital pension. They never knew about the 2,400 square foot commercial property I own on Williamson Road, leased to a Fast Med urgent care clinic at $4,600 a month, $55,200 a year. Purchased in 2011 for $310,000. Current assessed value, $485,000. My total net worth was approximately $4.5 million. Natalie assumed the Fieldstone house was the prize. She had no idea the house was the smallest piece on the board. And I had no intention of telling her. In hospital administration, we had a term, phantom billing. That's when someone charges for a service that was never performed. Have you ever looked at your own Medicare? Something shifted in me that night. Not grief. I'd had grief. I buried my wife. I knew what grief felt like. This was different. This was the professional part of me, the part that had spent 34 years walking into rooms where things weren't what they seemed, taking over from the father. The father wanted to call Craig and beg him to remember who he was. The administrator knew better. The administrator knew that what I'd overheard wasn't an impulse. It was a plan. And plans leave evidence. 34 years of healthcare compliance work teaches you one essential thing. The people who commit fraud always believe they're the smartest person in the room. They believe the rules don't apply to them. They believe the people they're defrauding are too stupid, too old, or too trusting to notice. And that arrogance is what gets them caught. Every single time. I'd seen it in radiology techs who billed for phantom procedures. I'd seen it in supply chain managers who diverted equipment to their brother-in-law's clinic. I'd seen it in administrators who thought they could bury a fraudulent claim in a stack of 10,000 legitimate ones. The scheme always has the same architecture: access, fabrication, confidence that nobody's watching. And the takedown always follows the same blueprint: documentation, verification, referral, prosecution. The order never changes. The setting had changed. This was my kitchen table, not my office at Mercy Valley, but the process was the same. I opened my laptop, pulled up every Medicare Summary Notice from the past 18 months, started building a spreadsheet. Dates of service on the left, my own calendar on the right. Hardware store receipts, workshop supply orders, church attendance records. For every phantom visit Birch Elder Services had billed, I could prove I was somewhere else. 34 years of administrative discipline, every entry time-stamped, every receipt filed. I worked until 2 in the morning. When I finished, I had 287 pages of Medicare notices cross-referenced against my own records. Not a single billed service matched a day I'd been home. Not one. I closed the laptop, looked at the balmanometer on my bench. The valve housing was clean now. The first layer of corrosion dissolved. Still frozen, but you could start to see the mechanism underneath. Fix what could be fixed. Replace what couldn't. Move forward. I started making calls the next morning. When you've spent 34 years in healthcare administration, you know exactly who to call and in what order. I didn't need a referral. I didn't need to search online. I needed a healthcare fraud attorney with OIG referral experience, a private investigator with federal background, a geriatric psychiatrist with expert witness credentials, and a forensic accountant who could trace Medicare reimbursements through a clearinghouse to a bank account. I needed the best in each category, and I needed them assembled within a week. Gerald Whitfield was first, healthcare fraud attorney. Richmond office, 7th floor of a converted bank building on East Main Street, with federal case law volumes stacked on every windowsill and framed certificates from 3 different bar associations on the wall behind his desk. Former assistant U.S. attorney, 8 years prosecuting Medicare fraud in the Eastern District before going private. Gray temples, reading glasses on a chain, a voice so quiet that opposing counsel has to lean in to hear him, and by the time they're leaning in, he's already made his point. His retainer was $12,000. I sat across from Gerald in a leather chair that had seen better decades and laid out everything. The Medicare notices, my spreadsheet, the Birch Elder Services connection, the SBA loan, the overheard conversation in Craig's kitchen. Gerald listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. Didn't take a single note. His fingers were steepled in front of his chin, and his eyes never left mine. When I finished, he set his glasses on the desk and studied me the way I've studied compliance reports for 3 decades, looking for the flaw, the inconsistency, the piece that doesn't fit. Mr. Moss, in my experience, the people who commit healthcare fraud fall into 2 categories: the desperate and the arrogant. Based on what you've described, your daughter-in-law is both. That's the easiest kind to prosecute. There's more, I said. I believe they're preparing a guardianship petition. They want to declare me cognitively impaired and take control of my estate. Using the fabricated care records as evidence of decline? That's the architecture, yes. The billing creates the paper trail, and the paper trail becomes the medical record they cite in the petition. I've seen this approach in 3 of my 11 Mercy Valley investigations. Fabricated documentation used to support a secondary fraud. It's layered. It's deliberate. And it will unravel the moment someone with compliance experience reads the claims. Gerald leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. "How much is your estate worth, Mr. Moss?" I told him. All of it. The retirement accounts, the 457B, the rolled-over IRA, the commercial property on Williamson Road, the rental income. The total. Gerald's pen stopped moving. He set it down on the desk with the careful deliberation of a man who is recalibrating everything he thought he understood about a case. He studied me over the rim of his glasses for a long moment. "You have $4.5 million, and you've been sending your son $3,400 a month while his wife bills Medicare under your name." I wanted to know what kind of people they were. Now I know. "You're angrier than you let on, Mr. Moss." I'm a father whose daughter-in-law is trying to have him declared incompetent so she can steal his home and put him in a facility. Wouldn't you be? Gerald picked his pen back up. "I'll need the full retainer by Friday. And Mr. Moss, don't do anything that could compromise the evidentiary chain. No confrontations, no accusations, nothing that puts them on alert." Gerald, I ran 11 internal fraud investigations over 34 years. Not one target ever knew I was investigating them until the findings letter was on their desk. I know how to be patient. Second call. Denise Falk. Private investigator. Former HHSOIG special agent. 16 years with the Inspector General's office before going private. She knew exactly which databases to pull and which clerks to call. Wore flat shoes and carried a leather satchel that had seen the inside of more federal courtrooms than most attorneys. Her retainer was $7,500. Denise and I met at a coffee shop in Salem, a quiet place with wooden tables and no one close enough to overhear. I gave her the NPI number from the Medicare notices, Dr. Arjun Patel. "Trace this," I said. "License status, practice history, any disciplinary actions. And while you're at it, pull everything you can find on Birch Elder Services, Medicare enrollment records, compliance filings, any prior complaints. I want to know if this is their first operation or if there's a pattern." "How deep do you want me to go?" "As deep as you went at OIG. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed an interesting case. FOIA requests take time. 2 weeks for the enrollment records, maybe 3. I've been patient for 4 years, Denise. I can wait 3 weeks. Third call. Dr. Samuel Osei. Board-certified geriatric psychiatrist at UVA Health. Published over 40 peer-reviewed papers on age-related cognition. His expert testimony had been cited in 23 guardianship cases across Virginia. His fee for a full neuropsychological evaluation was $3,800. I drove to Charlottesville on a Thursday morning and submitted to a 6-hour neuropsychological battery. Memory recall, executive function, processing speed, verbal fluency, abstract reasoning. 6 hours in a testing room with a psychologist who didn't know my name or my story, just the referral code. I answered every question the way I've answered questions my entire career. Precisely, completely, and without embellishment. When the results came back 10 days later, Dr. Osei called me personally. "Mr. Moss, you scored in the 94th percentile for executive function. There is no evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished decision-making capacity. To be direct, you are exceptionally sharp. Your verbal recall scores are among the highest I've recorded for your age cohort. I know, I said. I need you to put that in writing, with your credentials, and I need you to be prepared to testify. Testify? Someone is going to tell a judge that I can't manage my own affairs. Your evaluation is going to prove otherwise, under oath if necessary. Fourth call. Margaret Yoon, forensic accountant, CPA with a certified in financial forensics designation. Her office was a glass-walled suite in a shared workspace in Roanoke, the kind of place where the art on the walls is abstract and the coffee is good. Her fee was $4,200. Her job was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Trace every Medicare dollar from CMS to the clearinghouse to Birch Elder Services operating account at Valley Republic Bank, and then trace it out again. To the Escalade payment, the office build-out, Natalie's Nordstrom card, the prepaid facility room. Every dollar in, every dollar out. Margaret worked in spreadsheets the way surgeons work in tissue. Precisely, silently, and without wasted motion. "How far back do you need me to go?" she asked. 18 months. That's the billing window. But check the bank account history for the full life of the business. 3 years. I want to know if this scheme started with me, or if there were... They were here today, both of them. Faye took clinical notes, structured assessment format, the kind you'd use for an adult protective services referral. They're accelerating the guardianship timeline. There was a pause on Gerald's end. Then, carefully, "You've been performing for them." "I've been doing what any good administrator does during an internal investigation. You let the subjects continue operating while the evidence package is complete. You don't tip your hand. You don't change the environment. You let them believe the system is unmonitored." "Mr. Moss, Harlan, I've prosecuted fraud for 20 years. I don't think I've ever had a client who understood the investigative process better than I do." For the first time, Gerald saw the man who'd investigated 11 fraud cases and testified in 6 federal depositions. The confused retiree who needed help with his reading glasses had disappeared entirely. In his place was a hospital administrator who had built the compliance infrastructure for a 400-bed facility and never once had a conditional finding on accreditation review. Gerald set down his pen and studied me with something I hadn't seen before. Not surprise, exactly. Recalibration. "They thought they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules," I said. "I wrote the rules, Gerald. I just need you to enforce them." When I ran compliance at Mercy Valley, I learned something most people never think about. The people who steal from you don't break in through the front door. They use the key you gave them. Has someone in your life ever used your trust as their key? Denise Falk called on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into her investigation. Her voice carried the careful flatness investigators adopt when they found something worse than expected. "Harlan, I traced the NPI number. Dr. Arjun Patel surrendered his medical license 9 months ago after a pill mill investigation. The clinic in Salem closed 8 months before the last order was signed in his name. Every physician order on your care plan is a forgery, signed by a doctor who legally couldn't practice medicine when the ink was still wet. Same architectural failure I saw in 3 of my Mercy Valley cases. They use a closed practice because no active physician would sign fabricated orders. It's the laziest version of the scheme. High volume, low sophistication, and completely dependent on nobody reading the Medicare Summary Notices. There's more. I pulled Birch Elder Services Medicare enrollment records through FOIA. Faye Birch listed herself as the agency's compliance officer. She has no CHC certification, no healthcare compliance background of any kind. And Natalie's LCSW license was placed on probation in 2019 for falsifying clinical documentation at a previous employer. The probation was quietly lifted after a corrective action plan, but the board records are public. Prior bad acts, I said. Pattern of behavior. She's done this before. There's one more thing. Denise paused. I found Faye's employment history. She was terminated from a family practice in Lynchburg in 2014. The reason listed was administrative restructuring, but I talked to the office manager who replaced her. Faye was unbundling charges on lab work, billing individual components of a panel test separately to increase reimbursement. The practice fired her quietly to avoid the reporting obligation. So both of them have histories of medical fraud. Mother and daughter. Mother and daughter. My phone showed 12 missed calls from Craig that week. I didn't return any of them. Natalie moved next. 3 weeks after my wellness check performance, she filed a guardianship petition in Roanoke Circuit Court, emergency petition alleging my cognitive decline, my inability to manage daily activities, my need for supervised care. The petition cited Birch Elder Services care records as the primary evidence of decline. 14 home health visits documenting progressive confusion, medication errors, and impaired judgment. Services I never received. Observations that never happened. A medical narrative written about a patient who didn't exist. Craig's name was on the petition, co-petitioner. My own son's signature, right below Natalie's, asking a judge to declare his father incompetent. That evening, I watched the camera feed from my hallway on the tablet I kept in my study. Natalie was at my desk again. She'd found where I kept a spare key under the porch stone. She had her laptop open next to mine and was typing rapidly while cross-referencing a printed document. I zoomed in on the screen capture. She was drafting supplemental exhibits for the guardianship petition, fabricating my behavioral observations from dates I could prove I was at the hardware store, at church, at Margaret Yoon's office having my accounts forensically analyzed. She typed for 40 minutes, checked her phone twice, called Faye once to read something aloud, saved the file to a thumb drive, and left through the back door. She paused in the hallway to check her reflection in the mirror, the same mirror where I'd watched her rehearse a concerned expression months ago. She had no idea the camera had captured every keystroke. She had no idea the document she was fabricating would become Exhibit 14 in a federal fraud case. But the worst came 2 days later. Denise called again. "Harlan, I need to see you in person." She came to the house the next morning, set her leather satchel on my kitchen table, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a printed confirmation from Autumn Ridge Assisted Living in Vinton, a prepaid deposit for a single occupancy room. Room 217. $4,800 per month. 6 months prepaid. $28,800 total, paid from Birch Elder Services operating account, the same account that received Medicare reimbursements for phantom visits to my home. The reservation was under my name. Admission date, March 1st. The room had been booked 4 months before the guardianship petition was filed. I looked at that confirmation for a long time. The admission form had my name printed in the patient field, my date of birth, my Social Security number, which they'd obtained from the Medicare enrollment, which they'd accessed through my beneficiary ID, which they'd stolen to commit fraud in the first place. Each crime feeding the next. Each violation enabling a larger one. A system of theft with my life at the center of it. They hadn't just planned to take my house and my money. They had planned my life. They had picked the facility. They had paid for the room. They had selected a move-in date. While I was making them coffee and fumbling with mugs and pretending to forget Faye's name, they had already decided where I would spend whatever years I had left. Room 217. Single occupancy. View of the parking lot. I looked through the workshop doorway. The bow manometer was on the bench, half assembled, the brass valve still separated from the housing. A system taken apart to be examined. Every piece laid out. Every failure identified. I'd spent my career taking broken systems apart and finding the component that failed. I'd spent my retirement restoring broken instruments. Now I was looking at a document that proved my own family had planned to dismantle me. I put the confirmation back in the folder. Add it to the evidence package, but hold it for court. I want the judge to see this after the recordings, not before. The billing fraud establishes the crime. The recordings establish the intent. The Autumn Ridge confirmation establishes the plan. That's the sequence. Severity ascending. "You're sequencing the evidence presentation," Denise said. "I ran 7 accreditation cycles, Denise. I understand how to present findings for maximum impact." Margaret Yoon called the following week with her own update. "Harlan, I finished the initial trace on the Medicare reimbursements. Every dollar from CMS went through the clearinghouse to Valley Republic Bank, account ending in 4471, under Birch Elder Services, LLC. From there, $43,000 to a Nordstrom credit account in Natalie's name. $28,800 to Autumn Ridge Assisted Living, that prepaid room. $14,200 to an auto loan servicing account, the Cadillac Escalade. The remainder went to operational expenses, including $36,000 in salary payments to Faye Birch over 18 months. I have it mapped dollar by dollar, every transaction time-stamped, exhibit-ready spreadsheets. How soon can you have the complete package to Gerald? End of the week. Good. The preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. My phone showed 34 missed calls from Craig. I deleted the notifications without reading a single one. The countersuit came 8 days before the hearing. Natalie hired a young litigator from a strip mall firm in Salem, who filed an emergency motion claiming I was engaging in elder self-neglect and needed immediate court-appointed supervision. The motion alleged I had refused medically necessary home health services and was exhibiting paranoid behavior inconsistent with independent living. The paranoid behavior, of course, was that I'd changed my locks, which I had. Because my daughter-in-law had a key she used to enter my home unauthorized, sit at my desk, photograph my financial documents, and fabricate behavioral observations for a guardianship petition. I'd seen this move 11 times before. The escalation from quiet fraud to aggressive legal maneuvering when the subject senses the investigation closing in. It's a standard response. Every fraudster I'd ever investigated did the same thing when the walls started closing. They don't retreat. They file paperwork. They create counter-narratives. They try to make the investigator look It's the last move of the desperate, and it's the one that always backfires. Because every motion they file, every claim they make, every document they produce becomes another piece of discovery for the prosecution. Natalie was generating evidence against herself, and she had no idea. Gerald handled it in 3 days, filed a response citing Dr. Osei's neuropsychological evaluation, 94th percentile executive function, and attached the one-party consent statute alongside a declaration that all evidence had been gathered legally within my own home. The young litigator's motion was denied without a hearing. The judge noted in the docket that the respondent appears to be in full possession of his faculties. 51 missed calls. I turned my phone to silent. The guardianship hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in January. Roanoke Circuit Court, the old building on Church Avenue with the limestone facade and the brass door handles that have been polished by a century of anxious hands. I'd been in that building hundreds of times over my career, reviewing compliance subpoenas, testifying as a hospital administrator, sitting in on depositions that determined whether employees kept their jobs or faced criminal charges. But always on the other side, always as the institution's representative. This time, I was the subject. The courtroom smelled the way all old Virginia courtrooms smell: wood polish, industrial cleaning solution, and the faint chemical tang of nervous perspiration from the gallery. Judge Catherine Reeves presided. I knew of her by reputation from my years at Mercy Valley: methodical, impatient with theatrics, and famously difficult to mislead. She'd been on the bench for 19 years and had dismissed more frivolous petitions than most judges see in a career. Natalie's attorney went first, young, energetic, underprepared. He presented the Birch Elder Services care records, 14 home health visits documenting my alleged decline. He read from fabricated nursing assessments with the earnest confidence of a man who believed his client. He described confusion, missed medications, impaired judgment, an elderly man deteriorating in an unsafe home environment. He presented the guardianship petition with Craig's signature and asked the court to appoint Natalie as guardian of my person and estate. It sounded plausible. If you were sitting in that gallery and you didn't know the truth, if you were a stranger hearing for the first time about an aging widower living alone in a large house, you might believe it. You might feel sympathy. You might think the family was doing the right thing. For one cold moment, sitting in that courtroom, I understood how the scheme was designed to work. The documentation looked real because it was formatted like real documentation. The concern sounded genuine because Natalie had spent her career performing concern. The petition seemed reasonable because the law allows families to protect aging parents. Every element was designed to exploit the system's good intentions. That's what made it dangerous. Then Gerald stood. He adjusted his reading glasses, the ones on the chain, the ones that made him look like someone's kindly uncle, and spoke the way he always speaks, barely above conversational volume, so precisely constructed that every sentence sounded like it had been drafted, revised, and finalized before it left his mouth. Your Honor, I'd like to begin with the question of Mr. Moss's cognitive capacity. He introduced Dr. Osei's neuropsychological evaluation. 6 hours of testing. 94th percentile executive function. Memory scores in the 89th percentile. Processing speed well above age-adjusted norms. Gerald read the summary into the record slowly, letting each number land. There is no evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished decision-making capacity. This individual is exceptionally sharp. Then the calendar. My spreadsheet. Dates of Birch Elder Services billed visits on the left. My documented whereabouts on the right. Hardware store receipts. Each one time-stamped by the register. Workshop supply orders with delivery confirmation. Church attendance records signed by Pastor Williams. For every single billed visit, I was somewhere else. Not a single date matched. 14 phantom visits over 1 quarter. 0 actual contact. And the same pattern held for every quarter going back 18 months. The charges read like a compliance textbook I could have written myself. Conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1349. Healthcare fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1347. False claims under 31 U.S.C. Section 3729. Aggravated identity theft for unauthorized use of my Medicare beneficiary ID under 18 U.S.C. Section 1028A, and wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. 5 counts, 2 defendants, $287,000 in documented fraud. The hearing was held in U.S. District Court, Western District of Virginia, Roanoke Division. Federal courtroom. Higher ceilings than circuit court, heavier doors. A different weight to the air. The specific gravity of proceedings where the opposing counsel's nameplate reads, United States of America. This was not a family matter anymore. This was the federal government versus Natalie Birch Moss and Faye Birch. And I was the man who'd built the case. Gerald presented the evidence in the order I'd helped him sequence, ascending severity, the way I'd structured every compliance presentation for 34 years. You start with the numbers, because numbers are objective. Then you add the expert analysis, because expertise interprets the numbers. Then you add the human testimony, because humans make the numbers real. And then, only then, you play the recordings, because recordings are the truth that no expert interpretation can soften and no human testimony can dispute. Margaret Yoon took the stand first. She wore a navy suit and reading glasses, and she carried a leather binder with tabbed sections, one for each exhibit. She walked the court through her forensic accounting with the measured clarity of someone who has testified in financial proceedings before and knows that judges follow numbers better when you give them time to land. Every Medicare dollar traced from CMS through the clearinghouse to Valley Republic bank account ending in 4471, Birch Elder Services, LLC. $287,000 in total claims over 18 months. She projected the spreadsheet on the courtroom screen. Dates on the left, CPT codes in the center, dollar amounts on the right. The codes told the story for anyone who could read them. 99349. Home visit established patient, $189 per visit. 97110. Therapeutic exercises, $145. G0299. Skilled nursing home health, $212. I read those codes from the gallery the way I'd read them for 34 years on audit reports at Mercy Valley. Every one fabricated, every one billable, every one paid. Then Margaret showed where the money went. $43,000 to a Nordstrom revolving credit account in Natalie's name. Itemized purchases, including a $3,200 handbag, $1,800 in cosmetics over 3 months, and 14 separate clothing transactions averaging $400 each. $28,800 to Autumn Ridge Assisted Living in Vinton, room 217, 6 months prepaid, under my name. $14,200 to an auto loan servicing account, the Cadillac Escalade that Faye drove and parked in my driveway to block my car. $36,000 in salary payments to Faye Birch over 18 months. Compensation for her role as compliance officer of an agency whose compliance consisted entirely of concealing fraud. The rest scattered across operational expenses for an agency whose patience existed only on paper. Every dollar mapped, every transaction time-stamped. Margaret's spreadsheets were entered as exhibits. 47 pages of financial proof that Medicare funds intended for patient care had been converted into luxury retail purchases, vehicle payments, and a facility reservation for a man who never needed one. I watched Natalie during Margaret's testimony. Her jaw was set. Her eyes tracked the spreadsheet on the screen. I could see her doing the math. Not the Medicare math, but the other calculation. The one where she realized that every dollar Margaret traced was a dollar that could be traced back to her. Every Nordstrom receipt was a receipt with her name on it. Every deposit into the Birch Elder Services account had her signature on the corresponding claim form. The evidence wasn't circumstantial. It was architectural. And I'd designed the presentation to make that architecture visible, one floor at a time, until the whole fraudulent structure was standing in front of the judge with nowhere to hide. Then Gerald addressed the court. Your Honor, for context regarding the scope of the defendant's ambitions, I'd like to note for the record that Mr. Moss's total liquid assets are approximately $4.5 million, including retirement accounts of $3.1 million and a commercial property valued at $485,000 with annual rental income of $55,200. The number sat in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still. Natalie's head turned toward me, slowly, mechanically. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I was sitting in the second row of the gallery in the same navy blazer I'd worn to every compliance hearing at Mercy Valley, and I watched the understanding settle across her face in stages. The careful makeup couldn't mask it. The clinical composure couldn't contain it. The man she'd called already halfway gone. The man she'd billed Medicare for. The man she'd booked a room for at Autumn Ridge. The man she'd planned a warehouse in a facility while she sold his home, was worth $4.5 million. He'd been living on voluntary $3,400 a month transfers he didn't need, in a house she thought was his only asset, performing confusion for her clinical notes, while his net worth exceeded anything she'd ever imagined taking. Every sacrifice had been a choice. Every fumbled mug had been choreographed. Every small pension, she'd assumed, was a fraction of the truth. Faye sat perfectly still beside her daughter. Her hands, which had never stopped moving in every previous proceeding, adjusting her purse, smoothing her skirt, touching her earring, were frozen flat on the defense table. Then Dr. Osei took the stand. His testimony was brief and devastating. He described his evaluation methodology: 6 hours, 12 standardized assessments, normative scoring against age-adjusted population data. He presented his findings. 94th percentile executive function, 89th percentile verbal memory, processing speed in the 82nd percentile. Mr. Moss is among the most cognitively intact individuals I have evaluated in 23 years of geriatric psychiatry. The care plan submitted on his behalf describes a patient who does not exist. Then Denise Falk. She walked the court through Dr. Patel's surrendered license, the closed clinic, the inactive NPI number still being used to sign fraudulent orders 9 months after surrender. She presented Natalie's LCSW probation, 2019, falsifying clinical documentation at a previous employer, pattern behavior. She presented Faye's termination from the Lynchburg family practice, unbundling charges on lab work. 2 women with documented histories of medical document fraud, running a home health agency built on fabricated services. Then the Autumn Ridge confirmation. Gerald placed the printed reservation on the evidence table like a man setting down a verdict. Your Honor, this is a confirmation of a prepaid 6-month deposit at Autumn Ridge Assisted Living in Vinton, Virginia, room 217, $4,800 per month. $28,800 total, paid from Birch Elder Services operating account, the same account that received Medicare reimbursements for fabricated home health visits to Mr. Moss's home. The reservation is under Harlan Moss's name. The admission date was set for March 1st. It was booked 4 months before the guardianship petition was filed. The judge removed his glasses. The gallery murmured, low, uneasy, the sound of people processing something they wished they hadn't heard. Natalie's attorney put a hand on her arm. She didn't react. She was looking at the confirmation document as if it were a window into a room she'd never expected anyone else to see. Craig sat in the gallery, 3rd row. He put his head in his hands when the Autumn Ridge confirmation was read. He stayed that way for a long time. Then Gerald said the words I'd been waiting 4 months to hear. Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording captured in Mr. Moss's residence under Virginia's one-party consent statute. Natalie looked up. This was the final second, the last heartbeat of asymmetry before everything she'd believed about her own cleverness collapsed. She didn't know about the stethoscope case. She didn't know about the hallway camera. She didn't know that every conversation she'd had in my house for 6 weeks had been captured, time-stamped, and cataloged with the same precision I'd used to document 11 fraud cases at Mercy Valley. She sat at the defense table with the same composed expression she'd worn for months, still believing, in that final breath, that her words had been spoken in private and died in the air. The recording. Natalie's voice filled the courtroom. The AUSA had selected 12 minutes from 3 hours and 17 minutes of captured audio. Natalie coaching Craig on specific phrases for the guardianship petition. Faye explaining which billing codes to reclassify if anyone asked questions. Natalie calling my house, basically ours already. Craig asking, "What if Dad finds out?" And Natalie's answer, clear, casual, certain. "He's old, Craig. Old people don't find out things. They get found out." The courtroom was silent. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence of a room full of people processing something they cannot unhear. The court reporter's fingers had stopped. The AUSA stood beside the audio equipment with his hands clasped behind his back, letting the silence do its work. In the gallery, A reporter from the Roanoke Times was writing rapidly in a notebook. Another was holding a phone steady, transcribing. Natalie's attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. She didn't respond. She didn't move. The composed, clinical woman who had rehearsed facial expressions in my hallway mirror, who had performed concerned wellness checks in my kitchen while taking notes on a clipboard. That woman was sitting perfectly still in a federal courtroom, and the only movement was a slight tremor in her left hand that she couldn't control. Faye, beside her, had gone the color of old paper. Her lips were pressed together so tightly they'd lost all color. The hands that had never stopped moving in any prior proceeding, adjusting, touching, fidgeting, were clamped to the edge of the defense table as if she were holding herself in place. Then, the final selection from the recordings. The phone call from Craig's kitchen. The speakerphone conversation with Faye. Natalie's voice, playing for a courtroom full of strangers, reporters, a federal judge, and two women sitting at the defense table who had never imagined these words would be heard by anyone other than each other. He won't even understand what happened. He's already halfway gone. The judge set his pen down. He looked at Natalie for what felt like a very long time. The kind of look I'd seen judges give defendants when the evidence has moved past legal analysis into something that offends them personally. Then he looked at me in the gallery, and I saw recognition. Not sympathy, but the recognition of one professional acknowledging another's thoroughness. I was called to the stand. Gerald asked me to state my name and career for the record. I did. Harlan Moss, 34 years as administrator of Mercy Valley Regional Medical Center, 11 internal fraud investigations, 7 Joint Commission accreditation cycles without a conditional finding. He asked me to confirm the recordings were captured in my home under Virginia's one-party consent statute. They were. He asked me if I had ever received a home health visit from Birch Elder Services. I had not. He asked me if I had ever authorized anyone to bill Medicare under my beneficiary ID. I had not. He asked me if I had ever been diagnosed with or treated for cognitive impairment. I had not. Then Gerald asked a question I hadn't expected, though I should have. Mr. Moss, in your 34 years administering Mercy Valley Regional Medical Center, how many billing fraud cases did you personally investigate? 11. All 11 resulted in terminations. 8 resulted in criminal referrals to the Office of Inspector General. And based on your professional experience investigating healthcare fraud, is the billing pattern you discovered at Birch Elder Services consistent with the patterns you encountered in those 11 cases? Identical. Phantom billing using a closed physician's NPI. Fabricated care plans supporting a secondary fraud. In those cases, embezzlement. In this case, a guardianship petition. The architecture is the same. The only difference is that this time, I was the patient on the fabricated plan. The courtroom absorbed that. The AUSA made a note. The judge made a note. Natalie's attorney did not make a note. He was looking at the table. Then Gerald asked me to repeat, under oath, the statement my daughter-in-law had made in my son's kitchen while I stood in the foyer holding a box of my dead wife's Christmas ornaments. My daughter-in-law said, "He won't even understand what happened. He's already halfway gone." I looked at Natalie. She was staring at the table. Her hands were flat on the wood, perfectly still. The woman who had rehearsed concerned expressions in my hallway mirror, who had performed clinical assessments in my kitchen, who had sat at my desk and photographed my financial documents while a camera recorded every movement. That woman was sitting in a federal courtroom, listening to her own voice played back to her, and she had nothing left to perform. Craig took the stand as a cooperating. The AUSA asked him when he first became aware of the guardianship plan. Craig's voice cracked on the first word. Natalie, she told me in April. She said it would be better for everyone, that Dad wasn't safe alone anymore. And did you believe that, Mr. Moss? A long pause. His eyes dropped to his hands, gripping the edges of the witness box until his knuckles whitened. No, I knew he was fine. I knew the house was fine. I didn't know how to say no to her. When did you become aware of the Medicare billing? August. She told me in August. She called it creative billing. Said everyone in home health does it. His voice broke completely. He pressed his hand to his mouth and took 3 shaking breaths before continuing. I should have told him. I should have told my father. I knew what was happening, and I didn't stop it. I sat in the second row and watched my son come apart in a federal courtroom, his voice cracking on words he should have said months ago, his hands white-knuckled on the witness box, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hold himself together under oath, his eyes, which hadn't met mine in over a year, finding me in the gallery for 1 second. 1 second of contact. Shame and regret, and something that might have been love, compressed into a single glance. Then his gaze dropped back to the floor. I didn't look away. I owed him that much. A father watches, even when watching hurts. The guilty pleas came 3 weeks later. Natalie pled guilty to 1 count of healthcare fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. Faye pled guilty to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and filing false claims. Sentencing was set for July. Natalie Birch Moss was sentenced to 51 months in federal prison. The mandatory minimum on the aggravated identity theft charge alone was 24 months, consecutive, meaning even with good behavior, she would serve at least 2 years before the healthcare fraud sentence began running. She was ordered to pay $287,000 in restitution to CMS. Her LCSW license was permanently revoked by the Virginia Board of Social Work. Birch Elder Services was dissolved by court order. The converted guest suite in my house, the $44,000 home renovation, was stripped of its office furniture and filing cabinets and returned to what it was supposed to be, a spare room with a window facing the Blue Ridge. Faye Birch was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison, ordered to pay $287,000 in restitution jointly and severally with Natalie, barred from participation in any federal health care program for life. The Cadillac Escalade, the one she used to park in my driveway, blocking my car in, was seized as part of the asset forfeiture process. The last time I saw it, it was being loaded onto a flatbed truck outside the federal courthouse, with Faye's personalized plate still bolted to the bumper. Natalie's social media collapsed in stages. She'd built a following of 11,400 people on her Facebook page for Birch Elder Services. Warm posts about elderly care, stock photos of smiling seniors, testimonials from clients I now suspected were as fabricated as my own care plan. When the conviction went public, the comments section became a different kind of document. Her followers dropped, 11,400 to $8,000 in the first week, then $4,200 by the end of the month, then $1,100. Then the page was taken down. But before it disappeared, one comment stood out. A woman named Deborah, whose mother had been listed as a Birch Elder Services client, wrote, "I trusted you with my mother's care. I shared your posts about dignity and aging. I donated to your fundraiser. You were billing Medicare for visits that never happened? You were talking about the man you were robbing. I feel sick." That single comment received 847 reactions before the page went dark. Craig was not criminally charged. He cooperated. He provided testimony about the SBA loan misrepresentation, how Natalie had told him to describe it to me as a supplement import business, how he'd repeated the lie knowing it was a lie, how he'd signed documents Natalie put in front of him without reading them, because reading them would have meant acknowledging what he already knew. I filed a civil suit and obtained a default judgment. $163,200 for the monthly payments over 4 years, $44,000 for the office build-out I was told was a home renovation, and $95,000 for the SBA loan I'd co-signed based on fraudulent misrepresentation. Total, $302,200. Craig entered a payment plan. He did not contest it. His BMW lease had already been surrendered. His credit card debt, the $67,000 that preceded Natalie, was now joined by a civil judgment that would take him years to satisfy. As relator in the Key Tam case, I received 18% of the federal recovery, $51,660 from the $287,000. I donated every cent to the Doris E. Moss Fund for elder abuse prevention at the Roanoke Public Library. Doris would have wanted the money to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. I could. Craig came to my house on a Saturday in August, 3 months after the sentencing. I was in my workshop, fitting the recalibrated mercury column back into the balmanometer's glass housing. Delicate work. The kind that requires steady hands and a level surface and no interruptions. I heard his car in the driveway. Not the BMW anymore. A 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the rear quarter panel. He stood in the workshop doorway and knocked on the frame. He looked 10 years older. The designer clothes were gone. He wore a wrinkled polo shirt that might have been from before Natalie, one of the plain ones he used to wear when he volunteered at the Mercy Valley gift shop on Saturdays. His shoes needed replacing. He'd lost weight. Not healthy weight, the kind you lose when you stop eating regular meals because the person who structured your entire life is now in a federal facility in Alderson, West Virginia, and you have to figure out how to feed yourself. For a moment, standing in my workshop doorway with his hands at his sides, I saw the boy who used to bring me drawings from school, the Eagle Scout, the kid in pajamas running down the stairs at 9 o'clock. "Sit down, Craig." He sat on the metal stool by the workbench. He didn't speak for a long time. The workshop was quiet, except for the hum of the dehumidifier I run to protect the instruments. Then, "Dad, I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry." I set down the mercury column. Carefully. It's fragile, and I'd already spent 4 months restoring the calibration. Looked at my son. "You hurt me, Craig. Not just by signing that petition. Not just by standing in that kitchen while your wife planned to have me declared incompetent and put in a facility. You hurt me by treating me like a resource instead of a father. For 4 years, every phone call, every visit, every conversation had a $ sign attached to it. And when the money wasn't enough, you let her take my identity, my Medicare beneficiary ID, which is as personal as a Social Security number, and bill the federal government under my name for services I never received. I didn't know about the Medicare billing until August. I said that under... You knew in August, Craig. You said so under oath. You knew for 5 months before I filed the complaint. 5 months you could have picked up the phone and called me. 5 months you could have walked into this workshop and told me the truth. Instead, you let your wife fabricate clinical observations in my kitchen while I made her coffee. He was crying. Not the way he cried at his mother's funeral. Not that raw, honest, body-shaking grief. This was quieter. The tears of a man who understood, too late and with full clarity, what he'd allowed to happen, what he'd participated in, what he'd lost. What about the kids? Emmett and June. Can I bring them to see you? The kids are welcome. They were always welcome. But access to my grandchildren doesn't give you access to my life, Craig. Those are separate things. Dad, 5 years? 10? I'm your son. You're my son who stood in that hallway and said nothing while your wife planned to sell my home and put me in a facility. You heard her say I was already halfway gone, and you sat at that table and didn't make a sound. I know I should have. You signed a guardianship petition asking a judge to declare me incompetent. You told me the SBA loan was for a supplement business. You gave Natalie a key to my home, and she used it to sit at my desk and photograph my financial documents. You let them bill Medicare under my name for 18 months. Craig's head dropped. His hands were shaking in his lap. Then he looked up, and for the first time in over a year, for the first time since before the foyer, before the petition, before the courtroom, he looked me in the eyes. Steady, direct. The way he used to look at me when he was a boy, asking a serious question. I know I failed. I failed you, and I failed Mom, and I failed my kids. But I'm still your son. Yes, he was still my son. And I could see, beneath the damage Natalie had done, beneath the weakness that had let her do it, beneath the years of compliance and silence and complicity, the remnant of the boy who'd built a birdhouse and hung it in my oak tree, the boy who'd volunteered at the gift shop while I worked Saturday rounds. He was in there somewhere, damaged, but possibly not destroyed. The question was whether the damage was structural or cosmetic, whether the crack went all the way through, or whether there was enough sound material left to rebuild around. Yes, you are. And that's why I'm giving you a chance instead of nothing. A real one. Pay your debts. Start the payment plan on the civil judgment. Prove, not with words, Craig, with actions, over years, that you've changed, that you can make decisions without someone else making them for you. Supervised visits with Emmett and June every other Saturday. No financial discussions. No questions about my estate. No requests. Those are the terms. Maybe in 5 years, maybe 10. If you've earned it, we can talk about more. But right now, this is what I have to offer. And it's more than you gave me. He nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He didn't argue with the terms. For the first time in years, he accepted what was given without asking for more. "One more thing," I said. "Emmett asked me last month what a sphygmomanometer was." He listened to the entire answer without interrupting. "Wanted to know how the mercury column worked. When you bring him Saturday, tell him I finished rebuilding one. He can see it measure a real reading." Craig stood. He walked to his car. He didn't look back at the workshop, but he paused at the driveway's edge and put his hand on the oak tree, the one with the birdhouse still hanging from the lowest branch, for just a moment before getting in the Civic and pulling away. He came back 2 Saturdays later with both kids, and he kept coming. I revised my estate plan with Gerald 6 weeks after the sentencing. We sat in his Richmond office, and I dictated the changes while he took notes in his careful, exacting hand. The Fieldstone house, appraised at $890,000, would be donated upon my death to the Roanoke Historical Foundation, to be maintained as a community resource with a permanent workshop exhibit of my restored medical instruments. The brass tags with Doris's initials would stay on every piece. The commercial property on Williamson Road, $485,000 current value, plus the $55,200 annual rental income, was sold. Every dollar of the proceeds went to the Doris E. Moss Fund for Elder Abuse Prevention. The retirement accounts, $3.1 million, were divided. $1.8 million went into an irrevocable trust for Emmett and June, accessible at age 28, with an independent trustee appointed by Gerald's firm. Not Craig. Not anyone Craig chose. An independent professional fiduciary who would manage the money until my grandchildren were old enough to manage it themselves. $500,000 to UVA Health's Geriatric Psychiatry Fellowship Program, because Dr. Osei's evaluation had saved my independence, and I wanted other people to have access to the same quality of expertise. $400,000 to the National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association, because the fight against healthcare fraud doesn't end when one administrator retires. $400,000 to Mercy Valley Regional Medical Center's Nursing Scholarship Fund, because the nurses who cared for Doris in her final months deserve to have their profession honored. Craig Moss received $1 and a letter. The letter was 3 pages, typed, printed on the same Mercy Valley letterhead stationery I'd used for official correspondence for 34 years. It was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was precise. Every dollar he'd received, $163,200 in monthly payments, $44,000 for the office build-out, $95,000 for the fraudulent SBA loan. Every lie he'd told, every document he'd signed, every moment he'd chosen Natalie's instructions over his father's trust. And at the end, one line. I wanted to know if you loved me or my money. Now I know. The answer is more complicated than either of us expected. That's why you get a chance. Don't waste it. The documents were sent to Craig by certified mail. Return receipt requested. He signed for them on a Tuesday. I know because Gerald confirmed receipt. I didn't call Craig to ask. I waited to see if he'd show up Saturday. He showed up Saturday. I finished rebuilding the bowel manometer on a Saturday morning in March. New leather cuff, hand-stitched, matching the original pattern as closely as 70-year-old fingers could manage. Polished brass valve assembly, every thread reseated, every gasket replaced with modern materials, cut to original dimensions. Mercury column reading true for the first time in 100 years. I pumped the bulb, watched the mercury rise in the glass tube, steady, even, responsive, and released the valve. The slow hiss of controlled pressure bleeding down through the numbers. A system working exactly as designed, measuring what it was built to measure. Accurate, calibrated, restored. I mounted it on a felt-lined shadow box, turned it over, fixed a small brass tag to the back with 2 screws. D, E, M. Set it on the shelf next to the others. 14 instruments now. Each one broken when I found it. Each one working. Emmett comes to the workshop on the Saturdays Craig brings them. He's quiet. Reads non-fiction books about animals in the car on the way over. Careful with his hands. He remembers which tool does what, and he doesn't need to be told twice. Last week, he asked me to teach him how to check a brass fitting for corrosion. I showed him the vinegar test. He wrote the steps down in a small notebook he keeps in his back pocket. June tried to calibrate a mercury thermometer with a butter knife the month before. I let her try for 5 minutes before showing her the proper technique. She remembered it the next visit, and the visit after that, she corrected her brother when he reached for the wrong tool. She calls me Pop Pop, and she has her grandmother's stubbornness. I told her that once. She said, "Good." The house is mine again. The guest suite is empty. No filing cabinets, no laptop stations, no clipboard assessments of my cognitive capacity. Just a spare room with a window that looks out over the Blue Ridge. I drink my coffee there some mornings, in a chair I positioned to face the mountains. From the kitchen, I can still see Mercy Valley. It looks the same as it always did. The parking lot fills at 7. The lights go on in the administrative wing by 6:30. 34 years of my life are inside that building. 11 fraud investigations, 7 accreditation cycles, 2,000 employees who trusted me to keep the systems running. The systems ran. They're still running. I don't drive past Autumn Ridge. I don't need to see room 217. The room they booked for me. The room where they planned for me to spend whatever years I had left, confused and compliant, and stripped of everything I'd built. That room is empty now. I'm not in it. I'm in my workshop, surrounded by instruments I've restored, doing the work that keeps my hands steady and my mind clear, and my mornings worth getting up for. Some things can be repaired. Others have to be cataloged, filed, and permanently removed from the system. That's not cruelty. That's compliance. I pick up the next project from the shelf. A 1940s Spencer otoscope with a cracked lens housing and a light element that hasn't functioned in decades. I hold it up to the window, turn it in my hands, study the fracture pattern, assess the mechanism, decide which parts can be saved and which need replacing. Then I set it on the bench, open my toolkit, and get to work. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.